The Book of Genesis, chapter by chapter summary. Genesis 1, the beginning of creation. The Bible begins with the declaration that God created the heavens and the earth. Before creation, the earth was formless, empty, and covered with darkness, while the Spirit of God moved over the waters. God created the world in 6 days. On the first day, He created light and separated it from darkness. On the second day, He created the sky. On the third day, He gathered the waters together and caused dry land and vegetation to appear. On the fourth day, He created the sun, moon, and stars to govern day and night. On the fifth day, He created birds and sea creatures. On the sixth day, He created land animals, and finally mankind in His own image, giving them dominion over the earth. After completing His work, God saw that everything He had made was very good. Genesis 2, the Garden of Eden. This chapter gives a more detailed account of the creation of mankind. God formed Adam from the dust of the ground and breathed into him the breath of life, making him a living being. God planted the Garden of Eden, a beautiful paradise filled with trees and rivers, and placed Adam there to tend and keep it. God commanded Adam not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Seeing that Adam was alone, God caused him to fall into a deep sleep, and created Eve from one of his ribs. Adam recognized Eve as his companion, and the institution of marriage was established. Genesis 3, the fall of man. The serpent approached Eve and questioned God's command concerning the forbidden fruit. Through deception, the serpent convinced Eve to eat from the tree. Eve then gave the fruit to Adam, and he also ate. Immediately, they became aware of their nakedness and felt shame. When God came to the garden, they hid from Him. God questioned them, and both Adam and Eve attempted to shift responsibility. God pronounced judgment upon the serpent, the woman, and the man. As a result of their disobedience, sin entered the world. Adam and Eve were driven out of the Garden of Eden and prevented from accessing the tree of life. Genesis 4. Cain and Abel. Adam and Eve had 2 sons, Cain and Abel. Cain became a farmer, while Abel became a shepherd. Both brothers brought offerings to God. God accepted Abel's offering, but rejected Cain's. Filled with anger and jealousy, Cain lured Abel into a field and murdered him. When God confronted Cain, he denied responsibility for his brother. God punished Cain by making him a wanderer on the earth. Despite this judgment, God placed a mark on Cain to protect him from being killed. The chapter concludes with the birth of Seth, another son born to Adam and Eve. Genesis 5, the generations from Adam to Noah. This chapter records the genealogy from Adam through Seth to Noah. It traces the descendants who lived for many hundreds of years and produced children. One of the most notable figures mentioned is Enoch, who walked closely with God and did not experience death because God took him away. The chapter ends with the introduction of Noah and his family. Genesis 6. Noah and the ark. Human wickedness increased greatly on the earth. Violence, corruption, and evil thoughts became widespread among humanity. God was grieved by the condition of mankind and decided to bring judgment upon the earth through a flood. However, Noah found favor in God's sight because he was righteous and blameless among his generation. God instructed Noah to build a massive ark and gave him detailed specifications. Noah obeyed and prepared the ark for the coming flood. Genesis 7, the Great Flood. Noah, his wife, his sons, and their wives entered the ark along with pairs of animals and birds. Rain fell continuously for 40 days and 40 nights. The waters rose until they covered the mountains. Every living thing outside the ark perished. The ark floated safely upon the waters while judgment covered the earth. Genesis 8. The waters recede. After many months, God remembered Noah and caused a wind to blow across the earth. The floodwaters gradually began to recede. Noah released a raven and later a dove to determine whether dry land had appeared. Eventually, the dove returned with an olive leaf, indicating that vegetation was growing again. When the earth became dry, God instructed Noah and his family to leave the ark. Noah immediately built an altar and worshipped God. Genesis 9, God's covenant with Noah. After the flood, God blessed Noah and his sons and commanded them to multiply and fill the earth. God established a covenant with Noah, promising that he would never again destroy all life on earth with a flood. The rainbow was given as a sign of this covenant. Later, Noah planted a vineyard and became drunk. An incident involving his sons occurred, leading Noah to pronounce blessings and prophetic declarations over his descendants. Genesis 10. The nations of the world. This chapter describes the descendants of Noah's 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. As their families multiplied, they spread throughout different regions of the earth and formed various nations, languages, and peoples. This chapter is often referred to as the Table of Nations because it traces the origins of many ancient civilizations. Genesis 11. The Tower of Babel. As people settled together, they decided to build a city and a tower that would reach into the heavens. Their goal was to make a name for themselves and avoid being scattered across the earth. God saw their actions and confused their language, making communication impossible. As a result, construction stopped and the people scattered throughout the world. The chapter concludes with the genealogy leading to Abram, later known as Abraham. Genesis 12 to 25. The life of Abraham, Genesis 12. God called Abram to leave his homeland and journey to a land that he would show him. God promised to make Abram into a great nation and to bless all nations through him. Abram obeyed and traveled to Canaan. During a famine, he went to Egypt and presented Sarai as his sister because he feared for his life. Genesis 13. Abram and Lot became very wealthy, causing disputes among their herdsmen. To avoid conflict, they separated. Lot chose the fertile plains near Sodom, while Abram remained in Canaan. Genesis 14. A war broke out among regional kings, and Lot was captured. Abram assembled a force, rescued Lot, and recovered the possessions that had been taken. Genesis 15. God reassured Abram that he would have descendants as numerous as the stars. God formally established his covenant with Abram and revealed future events concerning his descendants. Genesis 16. Sarai gave her servant Hagar to Abram so that she could bear a child. Hagar gave birth to Ishmael. Tension developed between Sarai and Hagar, causing Hagar to flee before God spoke to her and instructed her to return. Genesis 17. God changed Abram's name to Abraham and Sarai's name to Sarah. God established circumcision as the sign of the covenant and promised that Isaac would be born. Genesis 18. 3 heavenly visitors came to Abraham and announced that Sarah would bear a son despite her old age. Abraham also pleaded with God concerning the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Genesis 19. The wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed by fire from heaven. Lot and his daughters escaped, but Lot's wife looked back and became a pillar of salt. Genesis 20, Abraham again introduced Sarah as his sister. God intervened to protect her from King Abimelech. Genesis 21, Isaac was born according to God's promise. Sarah rejoiced at the birth of her son. Hagar and Ishmael eventually departed and settled elsewhere. Genesis 22, God tested Abraham by instructing him to offer Isaac as a sacrifice. Abraham obeyed and traveled to Mount Moriah. At the last moment, God provided a ram to be sacrificed instead. Genesis 23, Sarah died, and Abraham purchased the cave of Machpelah as a family burial site. Genesis 24, Abraham sent his servant to find a wife for Isaac. God guided the servant to Rebekah, who agreed to marry Isaac. Genesis 25, Abraham died and was buried. The chapter records the descendants of Ishmael and the birth of Isaac's twin sons, Esau and Jacob. Genesis 26 to 36, Isaac, Jacob, and Esau. These chapters focus on Isaac and later Jacob. Isaac prospered in the land despite opposition from surrounding peoples. Esau sold his birthright to Jacob for a meal. Jacob later deceived Isaac and received the blessing intended for Esau. Fearing Esau's anger, Jacob fled to Haran. While traveling, Jacob dreamed of a ladder reaching to heaven with angels ascending and descending upon it. God reaffirmed the covenant promises to him. Jacob worked for his uncle Laban and married Leah and Rachel. Through his wives and their servants, Jacob became the father of 12 sons who would later form the tribes of Israel. After many years, Jacob returned to Canaan. Before meeting Esau, he wrestled with a mysterious divine being throughout the night. His name was changed from Jacob to Israel. Jacob and Esau eventually reconciled. The section concludes with the descendants of Esau and important events in Jacob's family. Genesis 37 to 50. The life of Joseph, Genesis 37. Joseph, Jacob's favorite son, received special treatment from his father. Joseph also had dreams indicating that he would one day rule over his family. His brothers became jealous and sold him into slavery. Joseph was taken to Egypt, Genesis 38. This chapter records the story of Judah and Tamar and the preservation of Judah's family line. Genesis 39. Joseph served faithfully in the house of Potiphar. Potiphar's wife falsely accused Joseph, resulting in his imprisonment. Genesis 40. While in prison, Joseph interpreted the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker. Genesis 41. Pharaoh had troubling dreams that no one could interpret. Joseph was brought before Pharaoh and explained that 7 years of abundance would be followed by 7 years of famine. Impressed by Joseph's wisdom, Pharaoh appointed him ruler over Egypt, second only to Pharaoh himself. Genesis 42:44. The famine spread into Canaan, forcing Joseph's brothers to travel to Egypt for food. They did not recognize Joseph. Joseph tested their character through a series of events involving Benjamin, his younger brother. Genesis 45. Joseph revealed his identity to his brothers. Overcome with emotion, he forgave them and invited the entire family to live in Egypt. Genesis 46-47. Jacob and his family relocated to Egypt. Joseph settled them in the region of Goshen, where they prospered. Genesis 48. Jacob blessed Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, giving them a special inheritance among the tribes of Israel. Genesis 49. Before his death, Jacob gathered his sons and pronounced blessings and prophetic words concerning their future. Genesis 50. Jacob died and was buried in Canaan. Joseph reassured his brothers that he held no bitterness against them. He reminded them that God had used their evil actions to accomplish a greater purpose. Joseph lived many more years in Egypt and died at the age of 110, expressing confidence that God would one day bring Israel back to the promised land. Conclusion. The book of Genesis tells the story of the creation of the world, the entrance of sin into humanity, the flood in Noah's time, the calling of Abraham, the birth of the nation of Israel through Isaac and Jacob, and God's preservation of his covenant family through Joseph in Egypt. It lays the foundation for the entire Bible and introduces the major themes of creation, sin, judgment, covenant, faith, redemption, and God's sovereign plan for mankind.